Grading for one question, 12 points, and for the rest questions, 11 points. Okay? So that means 8 questions, 11 points, 1 question, 12 points. Alright? So 8 multiplied by 11, 88, right? And then plus 12, 100.
Which question will be 12 points?
The first question is 12 points. Okay. So guys, ladies and gentlemen, an hour before starting answering the questions, I'd like to talk about language acquisition. First, language acquisition, and second, language acquisition. As you remember, we said that children acquire their first language or a second language through being exposed to the language that is spoken in the surrounding community, in their community. And like, take your mother tongue as an example. As soon as you're born, you're exposed to your mother tongue. That means your first language, and you pass through some developmental stages, and after that you acquire your first language. You begin to speak. But now there's a question. Do you think this, being exposed to spoken language, is enough to acquire, or is it the only way to communicate? Acquiring and speaking a language. Is it the only way to communicate? Remember, communication. What was the communication? Communication is
what is not said
and not written, right? So, while communicating, you comprehend what is not said and even what is not written. So, understanding what is not said and written. Do you think there is another way of communicating apart from speaking ability?
sign
Yes.
That is, of course, sign language. Okay, here's the question. When you dream, when you see a dream, or when you contemplate on something, when you think about something, you speak in your language, in your dream. So when you dream, for example, you have a Kurdish dream or Turkish or English dream, you start to speak that language in your dream. But what about sign language? Suppose that you dream. Would you like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is very interesting, but the book says so.
Yeah, right?
They do that.
Okay, so, like, now there's some research about sign language. You know, sign language, in Turkish we say İşaret, Dili, right? And even when people with sign language can dream in sign language. In the dream, they use their body language or sign language, and they dream in that language. This chapter is about sign language, about some other ways to communicate. Because some people have the ability to speak, whereas some other people, they don't have it. Instead of speech, the speaking ability, they use another ability, and that is called sign language. And interestingly, we'll talk about the sign language at the end of the chapter, after we answer the questions, and we will discover that sign language is similar to your first language acquisition. So children with sign language, they pass through some developmental stage as some other children with speaking ability do. Remember, when you acquire your language, you pass through some stages. And children with some sign language also pass through some stages. Even though acquiring some sign language is earlier than acquiring speech. Right? We'll talk about it later in detail. But first, let's answer the first question. Our first question was, what is the difference between gestures and sign. Gestures, in Turkish we say Jestler, like the jest, right? And your facial expression, all are called gestures. So what is the difference between gestures and sign language? In other words, does sign language consist of only gestures? This is the questions about this. Yani işaret dili sadece hareketlerden mi olur? Remember, let me make it more clearer. For example, when you communicate with your speaking ability, you say something, right? But right? When I say right, there's intonation. And then that means I ask for clarification. I want to clarify if you have understood or not. That's why I say right. When I do that, from the intonation, you can understand it is a question, right? So, think about sign language now. Do you think sign language consists of only gestures, or there are some extra extra gesture information involved in sign language?
Yes.
Yani işaret dili bizim pandomimlerde gördüğümüz gibi sadece işaret dili değil. Yani sadece bunlardan oluşmuyor. Biz böyle zannediyoruz. Ama bir işaretin yavaş söylenmesi, daha doğrusu bir işaretin yavaş yapılması, hızlı yapılması ve diğer işaretlerle kombinasyonu, yani yaptığınız zaman başınız hangi tarafa doğru eğik, kaşlarınızı oynattınız mı, oynatmadınız mı, vücut diliniz nasıl, bunların hepsi de o sign language dediğimiz olaya dahildir. Yani sadece sign language işaret dili değil, yani daha doğrusu hareketlerden oluşmuyor, bununla beraber ekstra elementler var. Okay? Soru da bununla ilgili. Okay, so what is the difference? Sign language. Signs is like speech and is used instead of speaking. Signs is like speech for people who cannot speak, right? For people with speech, for speech impaired people, for people who cannot hear and speak. This is for them like our speaking ability. We use our speech to communicate, and they use sign language to communicate. They are similar to each other, whereas gestures are mostly used while speaking. That's very important. That's very important. Right. See, that's very important. While speaking, I'm making some gestures. Did you understand? See, my hands. Did you understand? Right. You see, while speaking, I'm making some gestures. But sign language is completely different. Sign language doesn't consist of only gestures. It has more than gestures. Alright? Yani aradaki fark şu. Şimdi sign language dediğimiz gibi aynen bizim konuşma yeteneğimiz gibi. Konuşurken nasıl extra linguistic elementler kullanıyorsak, yani konuşulanın ve yazılanın dışında da farklı elementler kullanıp iletişim kuruyorsak, sign language de aynı şekilde. Sign language gesture'ların dışında da ekstradan elementler kullanıp iletişimi sağlıyor. Gesture nedir o zaman? Gesture sadece harekettir. Sadece gesture'lar konuşmanın yerini alamaz. Is it clear now?
So, can we say that gestures support the conversation, but it doesn't have any meaning by itself, but signs can tell some meanings to us, like themselves. Can we say?
Well, gesture, they have some meaning. They mean, they represent something.
but their initial function is supporting them. Right?
Like they support not conversation, while speaking they support your conversation, plus in sign language it is not enough only to use gestures, or it is wrong if you think your sign language consists of only gestures. Yani işaret dilinin sadece hareketlerden oluştuğunu düşünmek yanlış. Çünkü hareketler, yani o yaptığımız hareketler konuşmanın yerini alamaz. Konuşmanın yerini alacak olan nedir? Sign language'tir.
For example, this is a sign. You can tell everything is okay. Emblem is also sign.
Sign language, emblem. So, yeah, thumb up. Okay.